In this session, we are going to learn about the Kelvin cycle of photosynthesis. So let us begin. In the previous lecture, when we studied about the light reaction, we learned that the products of the light reactions were ATP and NADPH, which were synthesized during the light reaction or the photochemical reaction of photosynthesis. Now those NADPH and ATP will be utilized in the dark reaction of photosynthesis to produce carbohydrates or sugar. Alright, so the Kelvin cycle is actually related to the dark reaction of photosynthesis in which sugars will be produced. So the Kelvin cycle, it is related to the dark reaction. If you remember, the other name for dark reaction was carbon reaction also, and we also call it biosynthetic pathway. Alright, biosynthetic pathway because there will be synthesis of glucose or carbohydrate or sugar during the dark reaction utilizing the ATP and NADPH which were formed in the light reaction. Now if you also remember, this dark reaction occurs in the stroma of the chloroplast. And we also know that dark reaction does not means that it occurs in the dark. Dark reaction is a reaction which is not light driven, which is not directly dependent on light reaction, but it is dependent on the product of dark reaction. Alright, so basically carbohydrates or sugar will be formed. So how this carbohydrate or sugar will be formed in the dark reaction in the stroma, that will be clear when we learn about a special cycle called the Kelvin cycle. So the Kelvin cycle explains how the carbon dioxide which is absorbed from the atmosphere, which enters inside the leaves of the plant, that carbon dioxide is fixed. It is reduced, and that carbon dioxide after its reduction forms the carbohydrate or the sugar in the dark reaction. Alright, so we will study about the Kelvin cycle. So the Kelvin cycle is also known by the name C3 cycle. Kelvin or the C3 cycle. It was discovered by a scientist named Melvin Kelvin. He studied about the algal photosynthesis and discovered the C3 cycle. Hence, on its name, the cycle has been named as Kelvin cycle. And this cycle, it occurs in all the photosynthetic plants. So whatever the type of plant which is green and is carrying out photosynthesis, all of the photosynthesizing plants will have the Kelvin or the C3 cycle, irrespective of whether the C4 cycle is present inside them or not. What is C4 cycle we will study in the next lecture. So regardless of the regardless of the presence of C4 cycle in the plants, C3 cycle is present in all the photosynthesizing plants. Alright, so how the Kelvin cycle occurs and what happens in the Kelvin cycle, how the atmospheric carbon dioxide is fixed, let us understand with the help of a diagram of the cycle. So first of all, there will be a carbon dioxide acceptor, or the first carbon acceptor, or to be correct, the first CO2 acceptor. Now before we proceed, we can summarize the Kelvin cycle into 3 steps. So Kelvin cycle contains the 3 main steps. The first step is carboxylation, in which the first primary acceptor of carbon dioxide combines with the atmospheric carbon dioxide and forms the first stable product. This process is called carboxylation. Then the second step is the reduction, in which the first stable product, which is formed after carboxylation, is reduced to produce carbohydrates or starch. Then the third step is the regeneration. In regeneration, the primary CO2 acceptor will be regenerated in the cycle, so that this cycle can go on inside the plant, so that the cycle can continue and more molecules of carbohydrates will be produced. All right. So these are the three these are the 3 main steps. These are the 3 main steps of the Kelvin cycle. First is carboxylation, second is reduction, and third is regeneration. All right. So let us understand with the help of a diagram. So the first carbon dioxide acceptor in the C3 cycle is ribulose 1,5-bisphosphate. Ribulose 1,5-bisphosphate. This is a 5-carbon compound. Alright, so this is the first or the primary acceptor of CO2. So what will happen here? It will combine with the atmospheric carbon dioxide, CO2 from the atmosphere. They will combine and form the first stable product, which is the phosphoglyceric acid. Phosphoglyceric acid, or PGA. Now this is a 3-carbon compound. Now this is the first step, which is the carboxylation, the first step, and it occurs in the presence of enzyme Rubisco. Alright, so this step is the carboxylation, which was the first step. Carboxylation means addition of carbon dioxide. So where this carbon dioxide is being added? In the ribulose 1,5-bisphosphate, which is a 5-carbon compound, and it is the primary acceptor of CO2. Alright, so the product of carboxylation is phosphoglyceric acid, which is the first stable product. Based on the first stable product, which is a 3-carbon compound, this cycle is called C3 cycle, because the first stable product of this cycle contains 3 carbon, hence the name C3 cycle. Alright. Now this one thing about this enzyme Rubisco. This enzyme Rubisco is the most abundant enzyme in the world, and it shows both the carboxylase as well as oxygenase activity. That means it gets activated in the presence of carbon dioxide as well as oxygen. Alright, and yes, so Rubisco catalyzes the first step, which is the carboxylation. Now let us move on to the next step, which is the reduction. So the phosphoglyceric acid will now be reduced to form triose phosphate. And in this reduction step, two molecules of ATP and two molecules of NADPH, which were produced in the light reaction. If you remember, the ATP and NADPH are products of the light reaction. So these products, ATP and NADPH, are utilized here in the second step, which is the reduction. Two molecules of ATP and two molecules of NADPH will be utilized here, and phosphoglyceric acid will be reduced to triose phosphate. Alright, and here the products will be ADP plus NADP plus two molecules both. So this step is the reduction, which is the second step. Now this triose phosphate, it forms our carbohydrate or starch or sucrose. So this is the carbohydrate that is required by the plants, that is synthesized during the photosynthesis. It is produced after the reduction step in the Calvin cycle from this triose phosphate. Alright, so the second step is complete. Now the third step, regeneration. So from this triose phosphate, there will be one intermediate formed, which will ultimately give rise to the primary acceptor of CO2, which is the ribulose bisphosphate. And it is not important to remember the name of that intermediate, you just have to remember the third step, which was the regeneration. So what is being regenerated? The ribulose 1,5-bisphosphate or RUBP, which is the primary acceptor of CO2, is now regenerated, so that this cycle can keep going on, so that the cycle can continue, right? And for this regeneration, one molecule of ATP is again utilized here. ATP, here it will break down into ADP plus phosphate. So this completes the C3 cycle or the Calvin cycle. Alright, so what happened? We summarize the cycle into the three steps. The first step is the carboxylation, where the carboxylation or the carbon dioxide from the atmosphere is added or accepted by the primary acceptor ribulose 1,5-bisphosphate in the presence of Rubisco enzyme, and the first stable product called phosphoglyceric acid having 3 carbon is produced. It is because of this first stable product having 3 carbon, the cycle is named as C3 cycle. After that, the first stable product is reduced, consuming 2 molecules of ADP and NADPH, which were produced in the light reaction, and triose phosphate is formed. This triose phosphate generates the starch or sucrose, or basically the carbohydrate, which is produced during the photosynthesis. Then this triose phosphate give rise to a reaction intermediate, which Ultimately, utilizing one molecule of ATP regenerates the RUBP or ribulose 1,5 bisphosphate, and the cycle continues. Alright, so if we look here, one molecule of CO2 is being utilized for carboxylation, right? And for one molecule, 2 ATP and 2 NADPH in the reduction step and 1 ATP in the regeneration step. So total 3 ATP and 2 NADPH are required to fix one molecule of CO2. For one molecule of CO2 or for one turn of this cycle, 3 ATP and 2 NADPH are required. But we know that the carbohydrate or if we write down the formula for glucose, it is C6H12O6. That means at least 6 carbon molecules or 6 CO2 molecules will be required for formation of one molecule of glucose or C6H12O6, right? So 6 molecules of CO2 will be required. That means 6 turns of Kelvin cycle will be required to generate one molecule of carbohydrate, isn't it? So for one molecule of CO2 or for one turn of the cycle, 3 ATP and 2 NADPH were used. So for 6 molecules of CO2 or for 6 turns of the C3 cycle, we will have 3 into 6, 18 ATP molecules will be utilized, and 3 into 2, 6 into 2. Here it should be 6 into 3 and here 6 into 2. 12 molecules of NADPH will be required to produce one molecule of carbohydrate, NADPH. Right? I hope this is clear. So to produce one molecule of glucose or carbohydrate. Now if you see here, there is a difference in the amount of ATP and NADPH which were utilized in the Kelvin cycle. So 18 ATP is utilized and 12 NADPH are utilized. That means more ATP have been utilized for the production of carbohydrate. So in order to compensate for this difference between the ATP and NADPH, cyclic phosphorylation occurs. Cyclic phosphorylation occurs. If you remember, we studied about cyclic and non-cyclic photophosphorylation in our previous lecture, right? So in cyclic phosphorylation, only photosystem 1 is required, in which there is a cyclic flow of electrons that leads to the formation of ATP. So now it is clear that why that cyclic phosphorylation, or what is the importance of that cyclic phosphorylation. The importance is that the more amount of ATP which have been utilized in the C3 cycle or the Kelvin cycle as compared to NADPH, more ATP were utilized, and therefore to compensate for the loss of more ATP, the extra ATP are generated utilizing the cyclic phosphorylation. Is it clear? So I hope the Kelvin cycle or the C3 cycle is clear to you with the help of this diagram and the steps that we just studied. So this was all about the Kelvin cycle. Thank you so much.